Hi, I'm Jen Person, Director of defenddigitalme. We campaign for safe, fair and transparent data across the education sector in England. Today, in the COVID-19 crisis, the use of remote learning tools and digital ed tech has probably never been more prevalent in the news, as over 90% of the world's children and young people are out of school classrooms. And there's discussion of when they'll go back and how much of this sort of remote learning will carry on in parallel to today's systems. So while people are talking about what the future might look like and whether this remote learning will continue, I think it's really important to get an understanding of what today's systems look like and what it looks like in the classroom before policy decisions are made about what should carry on in the future and how things might change. Because otherwise, they're really likely to start from a wrong footing and offer the wrong solutions to what are considered today's problems. So I'm going to take you through a typical day in the life of an average 11-year-old in the states system today in England. We'll start the day about 7 o'clock with probably a text message to your own or your parents' mobile phone telling you about something that's going on in school that day or something not to forget. By 8 o'clock, you've been dropped off by the school bus, by your family. You're probably crossing a school patrol and you'll be picked up on the body cam worn by the patrol officer. That's before the 2, 3, 4 times you're picked up on CCTV, crossing the school playground, into the corridors and into the classroom. Some of those cameras these days are only the size of a 50p piece and not only pick up video, but will monitor gait and voice. By 9 o'clock, you'll be registered as present. If you're attending school, you'll be in the school's information management system. There's about 15 suppliers of these today in the UK, and if you've got a spare £500 million, you could be the lucky owner of the leading supplier who's currently apparently on the market with 80% of that market. If anyone's interested in crowdsourcing that, then let's talk. But by 9 o'clock, that registration system will have been uploaded to the core system for schools. And that's what you see really in the center of this diagram. All the core administrative activities that a school functions around today on things like admissions, knowing which children are in which school, whether you are attending or absent, the reasons for it, behavioral tracking, planning, the administration of the school in terms of the timetabling and staffing, and everything around the child's individual needs. So special educational needs, family, safeguarding, any links with social care, and of course, then individual records for each child will be named in the school's database. Those databases are, for the most part, cloud-based and, as we said, owned by about 15 companies in the UK today. And they are interfacing with the Department for Education's national systems, at least termly, if not more often. And either way, you'll be on the school's network. And if so, most schools, especially secondary schools, will be using classroom management software, sometimes called safeguarding in school software. These will be installed either on the school's own device, your partly owned device, and sometimes even on your own personal devices and mobile phones, depending on the school's policy. They will perform both filtering and monitoring. That means filtering out content of what children are searching for, that the IWF or the schools have deemed either illegal or inappropriate content to be seen in school, and also monitoring what children are searching for. These software will have capacity of thousands of words, of keywords, in what we call keyword libraries. And if a child uses these words in any sort of function on their screen, so whether it's an internet search, whether it's using an app, perhaps even logged in at lunchtime to seek confidential counselling, anything that's on the screen can be monitored. And they will be building up profiles of activity. Some, even when you trigger a certain keyword, would take a photograph with the webcam. And those profiles could be building up risk assessments, so potentially assessing that you are a risk to other children, perhaps cyberbullying. Perhaps you're at risk from others, looking for suggestions of grooming or radicalization or extremism. And those risk profiles may be then used to build up a prevent referral. Most of what happens to children around the use of these data is very opaque. We surveyed parents in 2018, and over 86% of them wanted to know what these keywords were and how they were used. totally counterproductive to what the companies suggest, because they say if we made those words apparent, then children wouldn't use them and would be counterproductive to what they're trying to do. There's real questions around the legality of these software and also around the child rights implications. The problem is around particularly some of the keywords is that they can be simply wrong, and there's no transparency around the error rates for some of these. So things like if a child has looked up cliffs, is flagged as a suicide risk, or has looked up black rhinos, has been flagged as a potential gang member. These are real cases that teachers have come to us with, and the schools are risk averse and don't want to delete these inferences because they're concerned that if a child ever should be at risk, then the school will have been accused of being not met its own safeguarding duty. So let's move on. By 11 o'clock, you probably have logged on to a platform, maybe one of the big companies like Google or Microsoft. And we can't tell you how many children and how many schools use these because the companies won't tell us. We've also asked things like how many teachers has these companies taught, and then sent back to the schools as ambassadors for what they might call Google schools. Again, we've no idea. These have significant implications for what the future infrastructure of the school's delivery of content might look like, and indeed the economic implications if this freeware should change its position and what they should charge schools. Perhaps you're using another type of platform, a learning platform that is remote learning. Perhaps it says it uses artificial intelligence and claims to be able to build up a predictive profile of what you know and what your learning gaps are, and will be able to tailor what you need to learn next, suggesting a different type of content from your neighbor in your class. But of course, when these are building up profiles of what you need to learn, they're also doing that by taking information from you every 2 seconds from every mouse click. And it's hard to tell then whether, if you don't understand how that algorithm works, whether it's really personalizing that program to your needs, or whether in effect it's simply finding people like you and profiles you against them, often using similar content to what they did next to. Finally, it's lunchtime and you rush out of classroom straight into the canteen. Most secondary schools these days are using fingerprint biometric systems to enable the use of their cashless payment systems. Since 2012, this has been even has a particular law in the UK called the Protection of Freedoms Act. But even despite this, that requires explicit consent, as with data protection law, 50% of parents told us in 2018 that where their children use biometric systems in schools, they've not been asked for consent. And we hear stories of children who have been told either they use the biometric system or they pack lunch, but they can't use the canteen. Or other instances where the children who don't use the fingerprint system have to eat last and be the back of the queue because it's slower to have to look up their name. There's real questions here around consent, around child rights, around data protection law, and even countries that, like Poland, who have recently ruled that under GDPR, that the use of such systems is unlawful. So we've got serious questions in the UK, where we are the most significant user of this type of technology in schools for children anywhere in the world. By 1 o'clock, you finish lunch, you're back in the classroom. Sorry, lunch break's over. And being tired in the afternoon, perhaps you've misbehaved. So you get a behavior point that a teacher will record in an app connected to the school's information management system. We'll again be building up a profile of good and bad points that will be recorded against you that every teacher can see, and some even allow your parents to peek in through their mobile phone too. It will total up the points across the year, and potentially some schools will use those to assess behaviour across the year. And if you're that child that hasn't got enough points by the end of the year, you won't be going on that school trip. In the afternoon, perhaps, again, children are a bit more tired and the teacher decides to use a quiz to open the lesson. Or perhaps at the end of the lesson, they'll be doing one for 5 minutes to wrap up. Many of these are classroom apps that will be third parties, commercial third parties. And whether you're using your mobile phone or your Chromebook laptop, logging into the quick quiz will make an assessment of your attainment and what you've learned. Again, these apps can be based in the UK, they can be based abroad, And most parents and families, children won't know who operates them, how long they'll keep your information for, and why. And many use both your name, your date of birth, gender, and lots of personal details to log in. You can use some with just a pseudonym, but of course then the schools have your personal information linked to that pseudonym behind the scenes. You won't know which app had a security breach in Australia last year and didn't inform its UK users, or that it was bought out by a large Chinese conglomerate. You won't know which apps pass on your details to employment screening companies, or which use test scores to better rank your performance for car insurance as you get older. Or you won't know if your emails are going to be repurposed, or that of your parents, to pitch your parents the latest upgrade for premium features in that behaviour app directly into parents' mobile phones. By the middle of the afternoon, let's move on. You come out of school, perhaps you're going into a school club, race across the playground. Again, you're on CCTV. And again, the school club might be using the core information management system to record details about your attendance or behaviour and keeps that in sync with the centralised system. And perhaps you want to borrow a library book before the day's up. You perhaps go into the library. Again, you'll be on CCTV. Often librarians will have multiple screens on their desks showing every corner of the room. And you'll choose a book, perhaps using the app that the library has chosen to use, which ranks books by points and levels and tells you which books you are supposed to read for your level. The questions around transparency, of choice, of curiosity, of whether that infers something about the child, are all things that parents don't get to see. In fact, even something that I learned here in lockdown, because it was a kind of app that my daughter got to use here at home after she'd finished a book, and she had to do a quiz on it to prove that she'd actually read it, and then get the points that book, the system had awarded to that book. Of course, if you're really smart, you just read the books that give you the most points. But don't ask why Animal Farm only gets 5 points when Harry Potter gets 18. It's a completely opaque system. It's perhaps not something that we're expected to care about. Perhaps the Cayman Island private equity owners don't care about it either. But I think parents really should start to care about it when it's probably influencing what and how our children read. By the end of the day, you get home and you'll be logging onto your school network again to be able to do your homework, perhaps using an app again, perhaps using one of these big platforms. And again, you probably don't know that by logging onto the school's network, even at home, your internet will be monitored. That's a really significant question for lockdown. How many families know which company and whether the school is monitoring what their children do online? The companies certainly aren't very keen to tell us how many webcam photographs they've stored, for example. If it happens to be the day in the year, which is the school census, or whether it's the school census that's taken every term, your records from the core information management system will now be winging their way to the Department of Education. Some will also be used by local authorities. The local authorities' use is for things like predictive risk scoring. They might add your records to your health records, DWP from your family, or even policing, and be assessing data for predictive risk scoring around children that might be at risk of domestic violence, or the significant factors for being taken into children's social care. There's very few people ask whether these individual scores about children make any sense at all, especially when children's key stage results are meant to be assessing the accountability system for the school, not meant to be a measure of an individual child's attainment. All of that data, the attainment data, your name, your address, your date of birth, unique pupil number, your gender, special educational needs, your history, your pupil premium, all of that and more will be forming part of your national pupil record now. It builds up termly every time it's collected in the census, and over 50 times before you reach 18 and leave formal education. That database now has over 23 million individual named records in it, built up since 1996, and each has a longitudinal record of your entire educational life, from 2 to age 4. It will include things like the baseline test that starts this year from September, the phonics test, your early years foundational stage profile, your statutory test scores from key stage 1 at 7, That will be changing and also be added to this year with the multiplications times table test. And the age 10 and 11 Key Stage 2 SATs test, again, all get sent to the Department of Education and added to the National Pupil Record. These will be before your GCSEs and A-levels, building up sort of progress measures and inferring progress that the school has made, supposedly measuring again that accountability of the school system, but in fact increasingly be used as individual measures. This was how our child's digital footprint looked before the COVID-19 crisis. And it's not that very different for most children now. Whilst you might not have the in-class activity, you might not have the CCTV or the biometrics for the canteen, most of these other activities are cloud-based and offered by commercial providers. And many of these will now have information not only built up from your school profile, but also from your home use, and using additional information around geolocation or IP. And it would be very interesting to know what they've learned during remote learning that are not then being passed on to schools, or data that's been kept in the commercial private domain rather than the public sector, and what we've learned about learning under COVID-19. We should certainly be looking at the land grab going on with some of these companies that are repurposing their data collections for other things. So, for example, one of the classroom monitoring software companies now offer a COVID-19 capture screen to be able to record symptoms noticed either in the child or the family. But the sensitivity of this kind of data shouldn't be underestimated. And it becomes increasingly sensitive as it is added to as you get older. Things like equality monitoring data, sexual orientation, disability, and religion are added if you volunteer that information as part of your UCAS higher education application. I don't think it's clear at all to students who apply to university that that information will be passed on a named basis and added to your named record at the Department for Education and passed around the higher education funding bodies. Again, something where you've got 10 steps that we want to see changed. So we've got some proposals at defenddigitalme, which again we brought out before the general election in 2019. Doesn't seem an awfully long time ago. And within that, we've got 13 areas of recommendations, including around infrastructure and broadband, including additional training for teachers on the digital sector and data rights and privacy, including what should be thought of and considered as part of due diligence. All questions that really need to be addressed as part of remote learning. And we believe really will bring about better clarity, consistency, and confidence across the sector using these kinds of tools. And I hope this day in the life has given you an idea of why it's so important that we create a rights-respecting digital environment in education. Our proposals set out not only the types of questions that we need to be answering around the infrastructure, the access of opportunity and digital divide, and how we address discrimination, but also things like how we address the procurement system for EdTech, how we reduce the investigative burden for teachers and schools, how we can restore autonomy and agency to children and families, to make them aware of their rights, to be able to find routes for redress when things go wrong, and to be able to address the emerging risks from new technologies, many of which are being trialled in classrooms today in England, brain scanning technologies, emotional and social surveillance. The types of technologies that simply would be unthinkable to trial at scale with adults, or that may simply be yet poorly understood, such as motion sickness in intensive virtual reality scenarios in schools. All these sorts of things can have amazing, exciting opportunities for children. But we need to know that they work, that they're pedagogically proven, and that they don't just look like something new and shiny, or that are a solution for austerity, for trying to fill a gap that cuts in staff in schools that have left behind. We need to make sure that we have data accountability across a school, across a child's lifetime and beyond, because their digital footprint lasts well beyond when they've left school. If you want to find out some more, come and join us over at our website. We've got an event coming up in July to accompany the launch of our new report, which maps the child's digital footprint across the education landscape in England in 2020. And we've got lots of people to talk about different aspects of these types of data collections, including the voices of young people themselves, talking about privacy, their education experience, and even an AI young developer. And I'll be happy to answer any questions on Twitter or via email, which can be found on the contact part of our website. Thank you.